Hello, everyone. This is our fourth week in our seminar series. As usual, we have again today two topics. Both of them are related to EU law. In the first part, we will discuss the Andreot Otto case, but not the case itself. Of course, Dr. Makris will talk about the specifics of the case, but the topic is not just only about that case, that particular, which is very important, by the way. It is discussed in all of the legal forums, especially in Europe. It's basically what he's going to tell us that how we should basically evaluate this decision from a legal theory perspective. And I hope that you will find his presentation very useful in that sense. Before giving him the floor, I will just briefly introduce you, Dr. Stavros Makris. Let me take my glasses first, I cannot read it. Oops. Okay, so Stavros Makris is a lecturer in law at University College London. He holds an LLB and LLM in philosophy of law from the University of Athens Law School, an LLM with distinction from University College London, so he has 2 LLM degrees, and he completed his PhD at the European University Institute at Florence. Prior to joining USL, Stavros was a lecturer in competition law at the University of Glasgow, a guest lecturer at USL, a fellow in law and a guest teacher at LSE, a postdoctoral researcher at Wageningen University Research. Is that in Germany? Wageningen?
In the Netherlands.
In the Netherlands, okay. And a teaching fellow at Sciences Po. So he has been in very, very different institutions all over Europe. His research, he explores how economic knowledge, legal reasoning, and values interact in competition law, and how competition law can incorporate new knowledge and remain responsive to changing social and epistemic circumstances without losing its integrity. And that's that is how he's related to today's topic as well. As I said, he will look at this case from the legal theory perspective. He has been awarded the Valentin Cora Prize of Excellence in Competition Law in 2013 for his paper Applying Normative Theories in EU Competition Law, the Ascola Best Junior Paper Award in 2023 for his paper Making Sustainability Visible, a New Framework and Operationalization Test for Merger Control, and Concurrence Antitrust Writing Award of 2024 for his paper, Sustainability Concerns in EU Merger Control, From Output Maximizing to Polycentric Innovation Competition, co-authored with Elias Deutscher. So, I thank Dr. Stavros Makris for accepting our offer to come here. We are glad to host him here at our seminar series. Thank you for being with us. The floor is yours. You have 35-40 minutes. And
excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam, for the kind invite. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's a real pleasure to be here. First time in Istanbul, so I'm really enjoying it. Professor Shanley told me that some of you have a background in competition law, not everyone. This shouldn't be a problem. We are here to discuss everything. Feel free to jump in, interrupt me, raise your hand, contest what I'm saying here. And I would like to devote these 35 minutes in one thing that I consider quite magical in competition law, and it's the following thing. We have one provision, this is all we need to know, right? This provision, a provision that prohibits abuse of dominance, and then we have voluminous case law. We have so many different cases, we apply the law to the facts, and the courts develop rules. So what puzzled me quite a lot is how come courts, enforcers in courts actually, start from this very laconic provision that has these key terms, any abuse of dominance is prohibited, right? So how come they start from this provision and they apply this provision to so many different cases, right? So a dominant company reduces prices above cost. This is abusive. An energy incumbent squeezes its margin. This is abusive. A port operator refuses to provide access. This is abusive. How come we came up with all these rules as a legal phenomenon? So how the judges create the content of law? This is the deeper issue that occupies me in this paper, and I will be discussing it with you. And in order to make this grounded, right, not abstract, I don't like abstract things. So in order to make this very grounded, we will be discussing cases, refusal to supply cases from the early days of commercial solvents to today's cases such as Bronner and, of course, Android Auto. Before jumping into the case law, though, I want to start with a framing issue. Because I wrote this paper that I asked you to read, and I'm sorry for torturing you with so many pages. I asked you to read this paper, and I wrote this paper because I was slightly dissatisfied with the way we explain this phenomenon that I just described, right? With the way we describe how competition rules come to existence. So in my reading, we have two narratives. One narrative, I call it the top-down narrative, and the other is the bottom-up narrative. So the top-down narrative does what? Judge Bork, US judge, right? Famous in antitrust circles. He said, unless we make sense of the goal of the law, it will be impossible to apply it. So the goal of the law should be consumer welfare, and then we will be fitting this goal to this rule, and then the output we will be getting is specific rules to concrete facts, right? So once we decide on the goal, then the law will make sense. I call this a top-down approach, right? We start from the goal, we interpret the rule according to this goal, and then we apply the law to the facts. Then there is another approach, and I call it a bottom-up approach, and this approach says, let's not discuss about the goal of the law. This is a never-ending debate. We've been discussing that for 30, 40 years maybe in antitrust circles, so we'll never really settle this issue. Then let's look at how judges develop the law in specific cases, and when the judges have some discretion, then they should be using mainstream economic positions or economically technocratic knowledge. And this is what can explain how we come up with specific rules in specific cases. So my point was that both these strategies, the top-down and the bottom-up strategy, are problematic for two main reasons. Because they share a common assumption that competition law is just a set of rules, and the existence of these rules is only a social fact. And when the rules run out, so when the judges don't really know how to apply the law, they will be using what? Economic formalism, meaning what? Technocratic economic knowledge, mainstream economic positions from economists. And this is what can explain how the law evolves. I was dissatisfied with that, and I will be using the refusal to supply cases to show you why I was dissatisfied. And instead, in this paper, I propose an alternative theory of adjudication. So what I'm saying there is rather simple. What I'm saying is that judges do not really look at the rule, look at competition law as a set of rules, but as a platform for argumentative struggles. So the different interlocutors develop interpretive theories about the law. They develop arguments about the law. And these arguments are a mixture of value judgments, doctrinal analysis, and economic thinking. It's not only doctrinal analysis and mainstream economic positions as the two previous approaches claim. Unless we see this component that there are interpretive theories that seek to fit the previous case law and justify it, and that the judges occasionally choose one over the other interpretive theories, we cannot make sense of the evolution of the case law. This is the point I'm trying to make in this paper, and for this reason I delve into the refusal to supply case law. And without any further ado, let us have a look at I explained all these points. Let us have a look at the cases. So the judges, early days of EU competition law, they had to apply this very laconic provision that I just mentioned, abuse of dominance are prohibited. They had to apply it to facts. So in this case, there was a company who was Commercial Solvents, who was the sole producer of two chemical components, two raw materials. Only this company was producing them. And they were dealing with another company, the Laboratorio Chimico. And the Laboratorio Chimico was taking these raw materials and it was producing an anti-tuberculosis drug. At some point, Commercial Solvents saw an opportunity for profit and they decided to expand in this neighboring market of the drug. So in order to do so, they did what? They said, we will stop supplying you. So there was only one other company in the market for the anti-tuberculosis drug. They needed this raw material because Commercial Solvents was a natural monopolist. Commercial Solvents said, no, I will discontinue supply so as to what? Expand in this market. The Court of Justice had these facts in front of them. And the judges said, this is an abuse of dominance. Why? Because it is necessary to have access to this input in order to compete in the adjacent market, in the downstream market of the drug. So by refusing to provide access, by discontinuing your supply, you completely eliminate downstream competition. Okay? So this is how we came up in these early days from the laconic 102 provision to another rule that says competition law can force access, can force a dominant company to supply its rivals when any refusal leads to elimination of all competition downstream and there is no objective justification. So now we have from a rule, another rule. And it makes sense here, right? It makes sense because we have a raw material where there is a natural monopoly. There is no other source of supply of this material. But now, we are judges and we have to apply the law to some kind of different facts. What are these facts? What if there is no natural monopoly over a raw material, but there is an IP right? Should we treat these cases differently or similarly? So in this case, there were broadcasters, and the broadcasters in Ireland and the UK had copyright over the information, over the programs, which was necessary to produce weekly catalogs. And there was a new company, Mr. McGill, and said, okay, why don't you give me the information, the copyright protected information to the weekly catalogs. I'll bring together all this information and I will produce a new product in the market, a catalog that combines all this information. The broadcasters said no. So do we have here abusive refusal to supply or not? Again, here...
Probably has no information, no understanding of the program, of TV.
Exactly. When we talk about ages, a century, like,
This is like
medieval times where the internet was not there, so we had to have weekly catalogs to know in advance what is played in the TV. So do we have an abuse of dominance here? So the court here articulated a rule from a rule. So it said, refusing access to an IP right is an intrinsic element of this IP right. IP rights are exclusionary rights. You have a right to exclude others from access to this input or information. But in exceptional circumstances, the exercise of the IP right can be an abuse of dominance. So what are these exceptional circumstances? If access to the input or the information is indispensable, which in a dictionary you will see means absolutely necessary. If it is indispensable to compete in the adjacent market, one condition. If refusal of access leads to elimination of all competition downstream, and if there is no objective justification, for instance, the party is not commercially credible, they will harm my business, they will never pay me, right? If there is also no objective justification, then if these three cumulative conditions are met, and fourth condition, because we have an IP right, if the refusal prevents a new product from entering the market, a refusal to provide this kind of information, IP protected information, can amount to an abuse of dominance. So this is how we came up from the initial provision and Rule 1 to Rule 2. The seminal case in this saga is the Bronner case. The Bronner case is slightly different because we don't have a refusal to discontinue supply, commercial solvents. We do have a refusal to provide access to IP protected information. We have ab initio refusal to deal. What was happening here? Mr. Bronner was operating a small newspaper, 4% market share, 3.6, the standard. So he asked Mediaprint, a huge conglomerate with newspapers, sport magazines, and a wholly developed nationwide delivery network for access. And Mediaprint said, no. Mr. Bronner said, if I have no access, my business is not viable because I cannot really replicate this facility. It's not sustainable, it's not viable for me to develop a nationwide delivery network. So the court had also there to articulate a rule to apply the laconic provision. And the court came up with the so-called Bronner conditions. So the Bronner conditions are the same as McGill, but without the new product requirement. So if access to an input is indispensable, if a refusal eliminates all competition downstream, and there is no objective justification, then this refusal, ab initio refusal in that case, is abusive. Now, if you have a look at the opinion of the Advocate General Jacobs, in this case, you will see what I call in this paper an interpretive theory. So how come Advocate General Jacobs come up with this rule, the Bronner conditions? So Advocate General Jacobs said, if access to an input or an infrastructure is made too easy, so if every time a rival is asking for something, is given, and we make it too easy to establish an abuse of dominance, then we'll be creating an incentives problem and a free riding problem. Why? Because the dominant company will have zero incentives to further invest and develop their facilities. Their rivals are benefiting, they are free riding on their efforts, right? And then also the rivals have no incentives to compete vigorously because they know what? That they can simply go to a competition authority, knock the door, ask for access, say our business is not viable, so we need access, and they will be given. So if access is made too easy, we will be suffering from this free riding problem. But if access is made impossible, then the dominant company will be able to completely dominate the adjacent markets. So we had, Advocate General Jacobs thought, we had to come up with a rule that is administrable and can be applied by authorities and courts. And this rule has these three elements: indispensability, elimination of all competition downstream, and no objective justification. Key detail here, indispensability means what? It doesn't mean that access is absolutely necessary for Mr. Bronner to remain in the market. It means that an equally efficient company undertaking as the dominant undertaking cannot replicate the facility, right? So the existence of the sustainability of this specific business of Mr. Bronner is irrelevant. The point of reference, the benchmark, is whether the facility or the input can be duplicated if there are actual or potential substitutes. you can understand that this indispensability concept means that the bar is very high. It's very hard now to establish an abusive refusal to supply because we'll have to demonstrate that what exists in the market is something akin to a natural monopoly. There is no actual or potential substitute. Fun fact, in this case, obviously, Mr. Bronner was not given access because access to the nationwide delivery system was not considered to be indispensable within the meaning that I just gave you. And guess what? Mr. Bronner remained in the market, and how he has one of the most successful, popular online outlets, news outlets in Austria. So this was the Bronner case. I told you also about the real life follow-up of the Bronner case, but what we have to keep in mind is these Bronner conditions, right? So now we have rule 3, from rule 1, rule 2, right? And what is rule 3? This one. So now we have the Bronner conditions. After Bronner, the court started constraining, circumscribing the refusal to supply doctrine. Why? Let me share that with you from the outset, because obviously it's very hard to apply this indispensability requirement that I just explained to you. So now we have the Google shopping case. Maybe you've heard of it. So what was at stake there? Google was promoting its comparison shopping service and affiliated sites and demoting their rivals to the digital Siberia of page 4. The comparison shopping services that were demoted in page 4, because of the status quo bias of users, meaning what? Users were staying in the results of page 1, at maximum page 2. So because rivals were demoted in page 4, they were deprived of an input akin to an essential input to remain sustainable in the adjacent market of comparison shopping services, which was what? Data. So all this practice, promoting its own comparison shopping service and demoting the rivals, was a ploy, let's say, on behalf of Google in order to dampen competition in the adjacent market of comparison shopping services. How? By combining the status quo bias of users with the essentiality of data. Google said, okay, Commission, you are claiming that I'm committing an abuse here, so you are actually forcing me to provide access to my rivals. Where? Here, to my organic results and also to my more premium display. So if you want to force me to provide access to my rivals, you will have to do what? You will have to satisfy the Bronner conditions. You will have to demonstrate that access to this information is indispensable, that there is no actual or potential substitute. If this was the strategy of the Commission, or if this argument was accepted by the court, Google would have won the case. Why? Because it would be impossible in this digital environment to establish that here we have something akin to an essential facility or a natural monopoly, or there is no actual or potential substitute of this traffic of data. They could get data from other sources. So the court said what? The court said, we should not put the cart before the horse. We should not characterize the behavior based on the remedy, forcing access. What we should be looking at is the impugned conduct. This is what the court said. So the elements of the behavior. Do we have an explicit refusal to supply here? No. Why? Because these guys in page 4, they are given partial access. So the court said, then we don't have facts that fit into the Bronner facts, so the Bronner conditions are not applicable here. What we have here is self-preferencing, we know afterwards, right? Or abusive leveraging. Google is abusing its behavior by leveraging its dominance in the search engine market, right? By engaging in this composite behavior of promoting and demoting, right? And by doing so, it takes advantage of the status quo bias of users and is capable of foreclosing competition in this comparison shopping services market. And on this basis, they are engaging on abusive leveraging. So here, this claim of abusive leveraging, of differential treatment that constitutes an economic anomaly, said the court, that deviates from competition on the merits, this claim was convincing. Why? Because Rule 3 that I just mentioned, the Bronner conditions, were not deemed applicable. So after Google Shopping, we have a Rule 4, and Rule 4 says what? Competition law can compel firms to deal with rivals under the Bronner conditions, except if there is no explicit refusal to deal, but there is partial access, right? So in that case, these criteria are not applicable. Pause for a moment and consider all this journey from the provision 102, right, to Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 3, Rule 4. It seems a little bit incredible. And now, let me focus on Android Auto. In Android Auto, we have some facts that quite easily could fit into the McGill and the Bronner facts. And actually, the Italian Competition Authority decided the case under the McGill case law. Let me explain the facts. Google and Enel were in negotiations. Google had developed Android Auto, which was mirroring a system which was mirroring Google's software on the phone in the car. So you could immediately interoperate your phone with the infotainment system of the car and create this digital replica of your phone with specific apps, not every app, in your car. Enel, energy incumbent, big company in Italy, had developed also electricity stations to charge electric vehicles, and also an app. This app was providing mapping services, but also was identifying the charging stations. They were in negotiations. Why? Because Enel wanted access to Android Auto so as to have a user basis, customer basis. Google said no. Okay, if we were enforcers, if we were judges, maybe you would agree with me that the applicable rule here is the Bronner rule. Okay, so what the authority has to plead is that access to this input is indispensable, right? You remember? Preliminary reference to the Court of Justice, and the court said, no, Bronner is not applicable here. Why? Because we have a platform that was not always developed as a closed platform. So Google did not develop Android Auto for its own use, but for third parties to flourish, develop their own apps, etc., etc. So because of this difference, Bronner is not relevant here. Now, you may agree with me that if we follow the top-down or the bottom-up approach that I mentioned at the beginning, we cannot really make sense of this case. Why? Because in this case, the court said, an authority might compel access even if the facility or the input is not indispensable. Why? Simply because the platform has been developed as open platform from the outset. Because of that case, a refusal here is likely to make the platform less attractive. Why? Because Enel will not be able to launch its Juice Pass in the platform, so the platform will be less attractive, and is likely to have anti-competitive effects. This completely turns the Bronner case on its head, right? So it's a very different approach. Now, if you look at the reasoning of the court said the preservation of the freedom of contract and the property right that justified Bronner are not applicable here. Why? Because digital platforms are developed under a different economic model, which means what? They extract value by engaging in shared collaborative innovation. So it doesn't really make sense to preclude access. Or if we force, the other point that the court made, if we force access to them, will not be really harming anything because by design they are supposed to be open. So there is no problem if we make the law more relaxed here, more permissive, more intrusive, and we allow to establish an abuse without satisfying the very strict Bronner conditions. So let me go here, no, here. This is now how we came up with Rule 5. So Rule 5 says Bronner is still good law, except, qualification 2, except if the infrastructure, so the ecosystem or the facility is not developed as a closed facility from the outset. If it's developed as an open facility, then the Bronner conditions are not applicable here. You remember with the Google Shopping, we had another qualification which was related to the nature of the conduct. Partial access vis-a-vis explicit refusal to deal. Here, we have a qualification that is related to the type of the company. Now, big picture. How can we make sense of this journey from Rule 1 to Rule 5, or from Bronner to Android Auto? I will be focusing only on that in the last few minutes. My answer here is by looking at competition law as an argumentative practice where interpretive theories clash and occasionally one interpretive theory dominates. What do I mean by that? If we follow the Borkian approach, right, that says, let's put consumer welfare as the guiding star, the lodestar of Article 102, and then see whether consumer welfare analysis, in this case, says, let's force them to deal, or let's not force them to deal. So, if we operate under this assumption, we'll see that the court did not proceed like this. So there was no economic study that was saying, okay, Bronner doesn't fit anymore in the digital context because we have empirical evidence that digital platforms operate in another way, or because we have empirical evidence or an econometric model that shows that if we force access, we will be increasing consumer welfare. There was no such thinking. Also, if we follow the bottom-up approach, which means what? Develop the law step by step from previous cases, probably you will agree with me, and also the Italian Competition Authority did the same thing, which is what? They considered that the facts in Android Auto were very similar to the facts of Bronner and McGill, and actually they pleaded the case and they imposed the fine under the McGill conditions. So my point is, if we want to make sense of this trajectory of the case law, we have to look at the interpretive theory, meaning what? The mixture of value judgments, doctrinal analysis, and economic thinking that underlies the case. So if we now compare and contrast Bronner and Android Auto, we will see that in Bronner, a case that is about the brick and mortar markets, the traditional economy, the classical markets, media, print, newspapers, the problem was market power, ability to raise prices above the competitive level for a sustained period of time. In digital markets, the problem is architectural power, curation power by intermediaries that can choose which company participates in the market or doesn't participate in the market. Digital platforms replace actually markets with algorithmic simulations of markets. So this has to be factored in somehow. Second, in Bronner, competition on the merits was interpreted, value judgment, right? Value judgment, as rivalry between equally efficient rivals. What did I tell you? The fact that Mr. Bronner could not survive in the market was not relevant. What was relevant was, could the input or the infrastructure be replicated by an equally efficient rival? So in Bronner, you protect rivalry between equally efficient rivals. In Android Auto, the idea is we want to foster competition where competition doesn't really exist. That's why we might even, it goes that far, we might even compel the ecosystem to develop the platform, the template, which will allow NL, JUSPAS, to operate. Why? Because here competition on the merits is fostering entry, fostering competition for non-existing markets. Third value judgment. Competitive harm in Bronner was conceptualized as eliminating all competition downstream, right? This is why indispensability was understood in this way. Here in Android Auto, the problem is not the elimination of all downstream competition, but refusal that might lead to the exclusion of a more attractive proposition in the platform, JUSPAS. So, hindering the growth of competition and reducing consumer choice and innovation is here the harm we are trying to prevent with 102. There is no mainstream economic proposition or study dictating the one over the other outcome, nor there is doctrinal analysis necessitating the one or the other. It's a value judgment that the judges make in one vis-a-vis the other case. And the last bit, my last argument, that we are talking about two different interpretive theories. In Bronner, we have what? We have the idea that innovation incentives or investment incentives will be chilled if we allow for a free riding problem. This is why Advocate General Jacobs conceptualized indispensability in this very strict way. Why? Because the underlying theory of innovation is what? There is a standalone company that needs strong incentives to innovate. If we chill these incentives to innovate, they will never innovate. In the digital environment, now we have a lot of studies that demonstrate that innovation doesn't really take place in that way. Innovation is collaborative, shared innovation. So platforms and digital intermediaries manage to extract so much value and create so much value because they organize an ecosystem through which different stakeholders collaborate. So here, what we need to protect is shared or collaborative innovation. If we're sticking to the indispensability requirement, we'll not be doing that. This is why we need to do what? We need to relax the Bronner conditions, skip this old case law, and follow a different approach that says precluding access to a more attractive product plus capability of exclusionary effects is abusive. So in that way, I claim, we can make sense of the trajectory of the case law, not simply by doctrinal analysis and economically technocratic thinking. And I'll stop here. Don't want to abuse my time.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Now I turn to the floor for the questions. Is there anyone who wants?
With the Android Auto case, I think
it's better for the...
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. With the Android Auto case, we are still talking about abuse of dominant position, right? Because when it comes to Android Auto, how did the commission or the authority establish that there is a dominant position? By reference to general dominant position of Google in search engine, or specific to the CarPlay applications? Because there is also Apple CarPlay, as far as I know, and in Turkish market, for example, I'm more acquainted with Apple CarPlay. So how did Android Auto become the dominant position, ended up having the dominant position before it abuses it?
So the relevant market was the Android Auto market, right? The market for infotainment services. So there, it was a single product or single services market. First thing. And the second is the court actually recognize that you don't really need to define the relevant market in these refusal to supply cases. And for the story, it's important to keep in mind that the Italian Competition Authority used the McGill precedent. So the idea was, you are, by refusing access to something that is indispensable, which is what? Access to the Android Auto system, right? You are eliminating all competition in this related product, so you are blocking a new product from entering the market, which is what the juice pass mapping services thingy. And on this basis, we are talking about an abuse of dominance. So, first, relevant market was not strictly necessitated, and second, the Italian authority used the McGill precedent to establish an abuse. And then the Consiglio di Stato made a preliminary ruling saying, do we need indispensability or simply deteriorating the attractiveness of the platform may lead to a finding of an abuse. So there they tweaked a bit the relevant legal problem, right? Because a finding of an abuse was established on the basis of the previous case law, right? Line of
There are
cases.
specific questions that the court has to answer in this particular case because it was a referral.
Preliminary, yeah.
Those questions were solved by the Italian Competition Authority previously, prior to that decision.
Yes, another question. Barış is there.
With respect to Android Auto case, I couldn't quite understand if it is an exclusionary theory of harm, meaning that Google has to be vertically integrated. I mean, it's Android Auto and there's Google Maps, but would the same criteria apply also in a purely discriminatory scenario where an application that does not compete with Google at the downstream level requests access, and Google just denies access for one application but accepts the request of another, but in the absence of any vertical integration?
Okay. So it's an exclusionary case, right? It's an exclusionary case. And the problem was that by denying access, you were precluding an attractive value proposition in the market. Bear in mind that Enel had other avenues to access the market. So you could simply park your car and download the app of Enel directly through your infotainment system. So Enel had other channels of distribution, right? So I think what was really at stake here was that the court was aware of the private regulatory powers of ecosystems and how value is created in a collaborative manner. So when the ecosystem has an open, let's say, economic model in the first hand, and then decide to close this economic model, then this capability of closing afterwards might have serious foreclosure effects, potential effects, and this is the legal requirement. You don't have to establish actual anti-competitive effects. Potential effects, according to established case law, are sufficient to meet the bar. And also, you would preclude like dynamic innovation and reduced choice in the market. So the concern there was to foster collaborative innovation. And the other thing that I have to say is that judges were a little bit strategic. So judges thought, okay, if we force access, they are unlikely to change their economic model, so value is unlikely to be hampered. So consumer welfare is unlikely to suffer. Why? Because in the digital economy, cross-site network effects and data-related advantages are the source of value. So no business, I mean, Apple did that with the iPhone and then they changed, right? No business will be able to be lucrative unless they have an open or a partially open ecosystem. So we will not do much harm if we compel access. So this was another thing that played some role in the case. I don't know if that
let me give an example. Let's say we are talking about WhatsApp, which Google does not own, and let's assume that Google does not have any substitutable service of its own, and it grants access to WhatsApp, and then let's say Telegram comes and it requests access. Would this be applicable to that case where there is no vertical integration?
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. And I forgot to answer this component. So the case has been criticized because the case actually is moving us away from Bronner, and it's actually a radical shift, a radical turning point, but it doesn't really tell us under what concrete conditions we can establish an abuse of dominance in similar scenarios. But if you ask me, it allows for a negotiation between the dominant company and the challenger. So the code also says that if you have a plausible pro-competitive explanation, meaning what? Technical reason or security reason, and it's proportionately applied and substantiated by evidence, you can deny access. So this effectively means that, practically, right? I developed an ecosystem, as you told me. It's irrelevant if I plan to expand in the adjacent market or not. They come and they ask for access. According to Android Auto, I might be even compelled to develop the template, not only give them access, but even invest in developing the template that will allow them to interoperate with my facility. They can go that far, right? Unless I have a plausible pro-competitive explanation and tell them, there are resources limitations or security limitations or technical constraints, and I cannot develop that. And because I've talked with some commission officers, because I was puzzled by a similar thing, do we have any limiting principles, right? So the way the commission, or at least some people, high-ranked officials in the commission, understand that is that if the first comes, they will have more chances, right? The second, the third, the fourth person, I have a stronger argument to say, I have some technical constraints and I cannot develop the template. But really, more cases are to be expected, right? So I'm not going that far to say that we should be satisfied with Android Auto, that the law is clear. I'm just trying here to say what? If we look at the interpretive theory, we can make sense of this case. It's not just simply splitting hair, or the judges are not understanding stuff. They make different value judgments because they see the particularities of digital markets. And then, based on that, if we identify the interpretive theory, then we can develop the case further and make it more administrable, right? So that has some limiting principles. I agree that we will need some limiting principles.
Thank you for the answer and the question.
Thank you for your presentation. The question that I would like to ask you was with regards to the WhatsApp, especially regarding the interim measures imposed on WhatsApp regarding its prevention of use of other rival AI tools using its underlying WhatsApp business. Do you think indispensability would be required with regards to any investigation on that front?
No, and I will tell you why. First of all, there is a larger wave of DMA zeitgeist that realizes that gatekeepers have bottleneck position or bottleneck power in digital markets, and it tries to undo that and instill more contestability and fairness in the market. Second, there is the AI overview investigation by the Commission in the area of AI tools. And third, if you have a look at the opinion of the Advocate General Kokot in Android Auto, I think this is a great opinion. It's not a refusal to supply case, it's a tying case, right? But why is it important? Because Advocate General Kokot says something about competition on the merits. So what is in the end competition on the merits? Competition on the merits is, simply put, but accurately I hope, being able to compete on the basis of product characteristics in specific markets. So the problem that Kokot identified in Google Android was what? You are Google and you have a super dominant position in, let's say, search, and also in the Android market, one market one product there, Android. So now, if you have the MADAs, the distribution agreements, under which the original equipment manufacturers are required to pre-install Chrome and search and manipulate the status quo default setting bias of users, users do not exercise meaningful choice in the market of internet browsers, so browsers developers cannot really compete on the merit in this market of browsers because Google is leveraging its dominant position in the search market and in the operating system market. Okay? So, under this, to answer directly, under this, I think if WhatsApp is leveraging its dominant position in the AI tools market, right, with exclusivity clauses or pre-installation conditions, etc., or by precluding access to others, we might have a problem based on the facts.
And as an additional note, I don't know if anyone here worked on Çiçek Sepeti decision or that case in Turkey, but that your presentation made me think it resembles the Google Auto case because Çiçek Sepeti is a dominant position, has a dominant position with regards to flowers, delivery of flowers, which was a marketplace, then decided to turn into a retail business model, but de facto Turkish Competition Authority stopped it being from a retailer and forced it to become a marketplace, continue to become a marketplace. I think that resembles the Google Auto dynamics because in basic terms, Turkish Competition Authority said, I think you were a marketplace, why are you turning into a closed loop in that sense? But I may be wrong, I didn't work on the case.
There are the Amazon Marketplace commitments that are also following a similar logic, that you might have structural incentives if you are the platform and you compete in downstream, and by your structural role you might distort competition, so we have to step in. So you might want to have a look at this as well.
Thank you. We had too many questions from this side. Let's go to the other side. We should favor them as well. So we should not discriminate two sides of the audience.
Thank you, Stavros. Great presentation. I see that the competitive harm paradigm has shifted in Android Auto. Do you think this will have any reflection in terms of calculation of damages in private enforcement?
I haven't thought about that, right? But
Can this be a benchmark of damage as well?
Yes, yes. But you know what is very interesting here is that damages and fines, unfortunately, are not that important in the digital environment. And why am I saying so? Because if you look at the Google shopping case, it took us 15 years to get there. The fine that was imposed was 2.4 billion, if I'm not wrong, which means 6 days of Google's day-to-day operation. So if I'm Google, will I ever be deterred from killing my competitors if I know that after 15 years I might pay these peanuts? I don't think so. So what we need to think about, and we were discussing before with Sam that, is remedies. And there is a lot of concern about finding the right remedies, behavioral or structural, that restore competition. And it's difficult, right? Because we need to be aware of what we are trying to do with antitrust intervention, with the infringement decision, right? Authorities have also to be a little bit honest and open about their benchmarks so that they can devise a remedy and then assess not only whether they got it legally right, but also whether they made a difference. But my 2 cents, because I am mindful of the time, my 2 cents is, it's interesting, your question, and we should be very much looking at quantification of damages. And here we have causality and we have quantification that might create their own problems. I will not get into that. But what is even more important for the sake of well-functioning markets is to look at remedies that restore competition.
Well, I think that's
all for now. I think questions are completed, and it's already 8:10 now. Thank you, Stavros, for your nice presentation. Thank you for the questions and answers. So we'll have a 15 minutes break, and afterwards we have another presentation. Thank you.